First things the first, I wanted to do another quick segment of the fast break. We just had a lot of news for what's normally a pretty slow week news-wise in the NBA. Everything's usually kind of reeling after the trade deadline and the dust is kind of settling, but there were actually some pretty fairly big news stories here this week. So let's kick things off with the big news that dropped just before the start of the All-Star game. Chris Paul, who played a little bit in the All-Star game, but nobody was really defending him, and there was really no risk for him getting a further injury. But he's going to be out the next 6 to 8 weeks with a fractured thumb. That really sucks for the Phoenix Suns. They're currently sitting atop the league with the best record at 48-10. There's good news, though. There's still a really strong chance that they're going to hold on to the best record in the league since they were up 6.5 games on the Warriors. And the acquisition during the offseason of Elfrid Payton and at the trade deadline picking up Aaron Holiday, that's going to soften the blow for losing that point guard. It's not as if they don't have backup point guards there that can kind of fill in. Obviously, nowhere near to the effect of Chris Paul, but it should be enough to kind of keep the ship afloat. And barring a complete disaster, a 6.5 game lead for a team as good as the Suns, even without Chris Paul, that should be enough to kind of keep the Wolves at bay. But the real bummer here is Chris Paul, he will be ready to rock for the playoffs, but by the time he comes back, it basically will be playoff time. I guess good news here is, he's a veteran and a very smart player, one of the smartest we've ever seen in the game. So it's not as if he's going to be super rusty coming back. There may be some rust, but it shouldn't be quite the disaster, or it shouldn't be quite the ramp up program that some other players might need. And also the fact that it's a thumb injury, he's going to be able to keep his cardio up. He's going to be able to stay in shape. So while 6 to 8 weeks seems a lot, I expect this to be more of a bump in the road for Phoenix as opposed to something that's just going to completely derail their season. So good news for them. Most Suns fans, while 6 to 8 weeks, again, does seem like a really long time, I think they can take a sigh of relief here. So Zion Williamson, more news on him. Again, with the Zion stuff, I always have to kind of brace for impact anytime I see a news story come out about him, because it's never good news. It just never seems to be good news. So word is he's going to need a second surgery on the foot. And this is just a disaster, tragic catastrophe, whatever you want to call it, all of the above. Foot injuries, especially on guys of Zion's body type, are career-altering type things, and especially when it's something that he just can't seem to get over or get moving in a positive direction with. I hope this isn't a case of, his career being drastically altered or, God forbid, being over, but all the signs are pointing in the wrong direction here. This isn't a case of something like Gordon Hayward where he gets just a freak injury here and there that'll keep him out for long stretches where it just seems like he has bad luck. These are really concerning injuries that keep piling up and keep combining. And if you couple that with the weight issues that he has, it's just not a recipe for success. If you want to check out more of a dive on this, I compared him to Shawn Kemp and kind of went through Kemp's career. Check out the Pelicans podcast. I did a video on YouTube on them, and I uploaded it to Spotify. So that's a deep dive on the Pelicans and Zion contentious relationship that they kind of have going on. But for this season, there's a 0% chance we see him come back. I think there's a 0% chance he plays this year. And through his first 3 years, he has played 3 more games than Greg Oden had at the same point in his career. 85 games for Zion, 82 games for Greg Oden. So in 3 years, he's basically played 1 NBA regular season. All hope isn't completely lost, though, to kind of end on a more positive note, at least with the Zion thing. Embiid had only played 31 games through his first 3 years, but that's the exception, definitely not the rule. So real cause for concern here for Zion fans and NBA fans as a whole. Next story I want to discuss is the T-Mac versus Harden kind of news that we had this week. Just wanted to quickly touch on just the stone cold character assassination that T-Mac pulled off this week on James Harden. So the quote, James Harden has been on 3 teams in 2 years. He puts on bodysuits and fakes injuries. There is no way he can be accepted as a top 5 shooting guard ever. His character is flawed, and all he really cares about is partying and quitting. Just Absolutely savage, just an absolutely savage shot taken at Harden. But was anything that T-Mac really said untrue here? I guess the first thing that really stuck out to me, hard to imagine James Harden not being considered a top 5 shooting guard of all time, but maybe one day I'll do a deeper dive onto that. I just can't imagine the case that he's not in the top 5 all time, at least for shooting guard. Also worth mentioning here, I'm not a huge fan of Harden. I hate that he's, as a left-handed guy, I hate that he's kind of the representative for left-handed players. So obviously my own bias is going to be all over this. In general, I just hate the way he plays. He just seems to play the rules, not the game. I just think it's a really dishonest way to play basketball, just being a foul mercenary. I like guys who just kind of play the game, play basketball. But as for the rest of it, it's really hard to argue against Harden being a quitter and having character flaws. We've kind of seen this play out throughout his career. He's had some really epic playoff meltdowns, and that you could attribute to either the conditioning issues that he has, well, like maybe you want to give him the benefit of the doubt and he's not choking. You just want to say, oh, well, he was just gassed down the stretch of games. Well, that speaks to his work ethic and not coming into the season in shape and just kind of playing his way into shape. Or if you want to play the flip side of it and just say that he's a choke artist, well, then the mental toughness side is really in question. Either way, it really speaks to what McGrady said here. I also hate the way that he left Houston. I mean, they catered to his every whim there. They traded players that he didn't like, traded for players that he did like. It just based on his wants. And just generally, they treated him like royalty. I get that they needed to retool in Houston and maybe he didn't want to stick around for that, but to just intentionally show up out of shape and just be a bad soldier and pout and throw a tantrum until they trade you is just extremely disrespectful. It's not as if the Rockets mistreated him during his time there. In fact, they treated him much better than most teams would have, putting up with his antics and kind of his off the court stuff, just being just the partying and not being focused on the season. Even on the way out the door, the Rockets were still treating him really well by trading him to one of his preferred teams. Fast forward 13, 14 months later, he's doing the exact same thing with the Nets, just totally despicable. It's hard to root for a guy like that. And who's to say he's not going to end up doing the same thing in Philadelphia? I think T-Mac really said what a lot of us were thinking, but if Harden wins a chip in Philadelphia, all of this will go away. Also, probably worth mentioning, Tracy McGrady does kind of have a horse in this race. Obviously, he doesn't want Harden to be considered better than him for like a shooting guard swingman type guy. So I think it's not entirely unmotivated by T-Mac's own agenda. The last news story I want to get to revolves around the Los Angeles Lakers. And my God, am I sick of talking about the Lakers, but they're just such a train wreck that we in the NBA community just can't look away from this team. And they're always just in the news for some general dysfunction type thing. This doesn't really attribute to general dysfunction, but Anthony Davis hurt yet again, 4 weeks with a foot sprain. I mentioned during the Zion part, I'm always kind of worried about guys, especially big guys who have foot injuries. It's just never a good sign. This is absolutely going to seal their fate as a play-in team at best. Currently, they're 6 games back of Denver for that last official playoff spot. And even if they had Davis, this would have been a tall order to get them into that 6th seed. And especially now, given how they completely fell apart defensively without Anthony Davis during the last injury stint, it's just not going to happen. It's not to mention LeBron played out of his mind in some really demanding minutes just to keep the ship from hitting the bottom of the ocean during that last Anthony Davis injury. I wouldn't even say that they kept the ship afloat with LeBron playing out of his mind. It was more just they didn't drag the bottom of the ocean floor. So are they going to ask LeBron to do that again, play 40, 45 minutes a game, point guard on offense, center on defense? He's going to need a permanent IV and a motorized scooter come playoff time if that's going to be the case. I know he's a freak of nature, but he is 37 and has logged almost 63,000 minutes if you include playoffs and regular season. That's just too big of an ask for a guy, even for LeBron at this age. It's too big of an ask for him to carry this crummy Lakers roster. So if they do try to manage his minutes, it's not even going to look as good as it did during the first Anthony Davis stint, and it didn't look good. So it could be a disaster. I mean, it's not inconceivable that they fall out of the play-in spot. It is unlikely that that happens. The Blazers are likely to going to start tanking along with the rest of the West, with the exception of the Kings and Pelicans, who are going to try to fight for that last play-in spot. But they're 4.5 and 6 games behind the Lakers, respectively. So I think the Lakers are going to be able to hold off at least one of those two teams to secure that, at least the last play-in spot. Unfortunately, though, that wasn't it for the Lakers. A report came out that tensions between GM Rob Pelinka and GM himself, LeBron James, reached a boiling point centered around the Lakers' unwillingness to trade Russell Westbrook and their 2027 first-round pick for John Wall. LeBron really needs to stick to playing and less GMing. It was he and Anthony Davis who pushed to bring in Russell Westbrook, and here we are, 6 to 8 months later, and they're hell-bent on pushing him out of the door, Russell Westbrook. LeBron just seems like the type of dude who's like, I'm a great GM. What are you guys talking about? I'm great when I play 2K. I'm great at managing a team there. And look, I'm 5-0 in All-Star games, so I'm obviously a great GM. It's just not the case. I talked about previously how I was really questioning how much of an upgrade, if any, John Wall would be on Russell Westbrook. So I really understand Rob Pelinka not wanting to trade a potentially very high draft pick, since it isn't likely resulting in a title if they pick up Wall. I mean, it might be a marginal upgrade at best. It's definitely not going to put them over the top. And with LeBron obviously leaving, he doesn't care about them keeping that 2027 pick. So I can understand why he was kind of pushing for that. That pick isn't going to be around to help him. He's either going to be retired or with some other team. The writing is on the wall here with respect to LeBron. So I think next time he makes a demand, they should just tell him to kick rocks and do what's best for the team. It's very unlikely LeBron is signing on after next season for another Lakers go. Also, he announced this week that he's planning on playing his last season with his son, Bronny. So wherever that will be, there's almost a 0% chance it's going to be the Lakers. So it's really unlikely he signs on after this contract. But the real question is now, does the team draft Bronny higher than he's valued at, knowing that you're going to get the LeBron James swan song and like a weird 2-for-1 package, assuming that Bronny doesn't become like a top tier draft prospect or a top pick on his own? If you have a really good team already and you feel like a 40-ish-year-old LeBron is going to give you the push over the top for the title, maybe you do trade up for Bronny, or maybe you reach for him earlier in the draft knowing that you're going to get LeBron. Even if Bronny wasn't good enough to be like a real NBA player, that might be a strategy to take. No idea. No idea if that's going to be the case, what kind of player Bronny is going to be. But I mean, I guess you're getting LeBron James in the package, so why not take a risk on it?